Y'all didn't treat Black people right. And until I think the party has a conversation around its anti-Blackness, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Tell You the Truth, the podcast where the group chat comes to life. Let's get started. Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Tell You the Truth. I'm your host, Brittany Sharpton, and I am so excited to share this conversation with Deesha Dyer, former White House social secretary under President Obama. It was incredible, and it could not have come at a better time. To tell you the truth, I've been in my head this week replaying a professional setback that really shook my confidence. And this conversation was so fitting. Sitting down with Deesha reminded me of why I do what I do. There are many whys in my life, but sometimes you need a real conversation to remember who the F you are. So, yeah, I'm re-inspired. I'm encouraged. In today's episode, Deesha peels back the layers of her journey, sharing the challenges of navigating DC's elite circles, confronting imposter syndrome, and prioritizing self-worth over societal expectations, plus some lighter moments like guilty pleasures and behind-the-scenes stories from the White House. Grab a cup of coffee, a notebook, or just settle in because this is one conversation you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Deesha, the first thing I wanted to start with that had me cracking up, you posted on your story this Mary J. Blige meme.
Oh, gracious. Which one is it? Oh, that one. Yeah.
So, right. Just for people who may be listening, it said, F that. I need to live. I need to breathe. I got to take my time and space for me. The hell with y'all. I suffered too much for y'all. And I was nodding. I saved it because I wanted to repost it. I feel like it could apply to many facets of our lives, but you had they equals, in this particular story, Democrats. So can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And for me, I still have a bit of just angst and emotion and rage after the election. And I think that for me, being somebody who was in Democratic politics during the Obama years, not really before that or really after that, it is very interesting how with Black women, they ask us to do so much. They ask us to come in and save everything at the last minute when they realize that they've excluded us and, all the things. And so I think that for me was very much like, look here, Democratic Party, I was in the streets the night of election. I was helping out. I was advising. I was doing all these things, but y'all didn't treat Black people right. And until I think the party has a conversation around its anti-Blackness, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. So I think that was in reaction to that. And that also is in reaction to me being like, I got to stop sacrificing myself for all these causes that do not sacrifice themselves for me. And that's that. And I think that we feel bad about that because it's just like, that sounds so selfish. But at the same time, it's just like, well, it's been proven that we need to take a step back and take care of ourselves because no one else will. So yeah, that's what that was in response to.
That's what I figured you meant, but I was like, this encapsulates what I think most Black women felt, even prior to this. We're tired. I don't feel bad about it. I think you just said people feel bad about being selfish. I know it has a negative connotation, but if you can't put yourself first, it's not going to work.
And we've sacrificed a lot. We sacrificed a lot for the idealism of the Democratic Party and for Democrats. And I'm not saying that they're all bad, but I just think that at this point in time, we need to be a little selfish about our goals, like our health, our wealth, all those things, because if not, then who's going to do it? So we need to, lead by example. And then when the election, all this stuff starts coming back around and midterms, we'll be involved again, of course. But for right now, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah, I'm with you. That's why this will definitely get a repost. So, Deesha, your journey is so inspiring. You've been a masterclass of redefining what it means to reinvent yourself, resilient, somehow been able to suppress what most people would have as an ego at a certain stage in life. You've been a hip hop journalist, a White
Mm-hmm.
House social secretary, you're a social
Mm-hmm.
impact leader, and I love how you
Mm-hmm.
have your hubby Wes as your like COO. Oh my God, that's so cute.
Yes, keep it in the family. Keep it in the family,
Yeah,
child.
yeah. And your nonprofits, and
Mm,
now your memoir, Undiplomatic: How My
mhm,
Attitude Created the Best Kind of Trouble. You've done
mhm,
seemingly it all, but I kind of
mhm.
want to back up some. So, for people who don't
Of
know
course.
what a social secretary does, can you toot your horn and share that it's more than just planning parties?
Of course, of course. And so the social secretary is a position that sits under the first lady's office, but it works both with the first lady and the president on anything that happens in the executive mansion at 1600 Pennsylvania. So that is everything from press conferences to state dinners to big celebrations to holiday parties to memorials. So all of those things the social secretary leads along with an amazing team in the social office, but also the calligraphers, chefs, the butlers, the ushers, the visitors office, the West Wing on like invites and guest lists. So you kind of bring all of that to a head and then help execute the vision of the president, first lady, and the message using all of those people and their talents and their skills to get it done. So it's a high pressure position, but it's also a really fulfilling one that you get to help open up the White House to people.
Yes, you were only the second Black woman to hold this position.
Yes.
You describe yourself as a late bloomer. You started community college
Mm-hmm.
at 29, I believe.
Yes.
You took
Mm-hmm.
this internship at 31,
Mm-hmm.
eventually became the social secretary. So I have so many questions on this, but I hear, like, I've listened and read a lot of your essays and listened to interviews. And for some reason, everyone is thinking that 31 is considered old. That's one thing. I know that most interns, I guess, are 19 to 22, but still.
Yeah.
So, like, what kept you going when it felt like the odds were against you? And what would you
Mm-hmm.
say to someone who feels like they missed the boat?
That is a great question. And I think that, I think when you're in your 20s or even late teens, anything over 28 is like, oh, like senior citizen. You know what I'm saying? But I think, what kept me going really was my curiosity. I think once that, I started once I dropped out of college the first time and I just was working at the mall and, then started like kind of going to hip hop clubs nonstop and, just documenting things that I loved and dancing and everything else. It kind of just opened my world to I've never been a journalist before and I've never done this, but I like I like the culture. I love the culture and I want to be able to tell people stories through the culture. And I want to be able to get to the back of who this person is behind the music. So it was very early and I started doing this whole thing called Vibing with Deesha. And it was really just like, instead of asking you about your lyrics, I'd be like, oh, tell me about your family and your favorite pair of sneakers and, whatever. And I think for me, that just continued. And when I applied for the White House internship, I didn't have the confidence to think I would get it, but I think that I had the audacity to try. And, the application wasn't that hard. So it was like write some essays. And I was like, well, I'm a writer. So I was like, that. And then once I got to the White House, after I got the internship, I kind of got addicted to the power that within myself, not the power within the White House, power within myself and the possibility which counteracted every insecurity that I had had about myself before. And I just rode that wave. And so every promotion that I got, everything I did was definitely not because of the money, because no, at the White House. And it was mainly because I was like, I want to try this and I'm interested in this. Oh, there's a job for that. And so then I would go after it. So that is kind of how I've operated. And I still operate that way pretty much, which is why I'm like a chameleon and just do so many things.
I
So,
love
yeah.
it. I love it. So you
Yeah.
said, I think you worked at, and I always mispronounce this. Was it Aubon Pain or Aubon Pond? How do you pronounce it?
Listen, girl, I don't know. I just got.
Oh,
I listen. We gonna say it how we say it. I say Aubin Pain. But again, I don't speak French. So, but I did work at Aubin Pain. Yes.
okay, right. I called it ABP when I was in
There we
Philly.
go.
I was
There
like,
we go.
hey, that's not
People know what you're
everything.
talking
So-
about.
Right. They know
It's
what I'm
good.
talking about.
It's good.
It is
Mhm.
good. It is good. So historically, This role has been reserved for people with inherited privilege, connections. Did you encounter any resistance as a Black woman from a non-traditional background stepping into the space? And how did you handle
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I did. Thankfully, I didn't encounter that from the president and first lady. So
Mhm.
that's really who mattered because they are the ones that
Right.
hired me and the ones that I ultimately represented and served. And so I think that most of the resistance that I encountered was really the Washington social scene. I had a lot of people that were amazing and embraced me, but then I had a bunch of, I don't want to call them elders, but kind of like the statesmen in
Mhm.
DC in the social scene who, I didn't talk like, a lot of people. I'm from Philly, so sometimes I talk like I'm from Philly. And I didn't know the big players. Like I didn't understand like the politicos and who's on the newscast and who has the TV shows and
Mhm.
who I didn't know all that. And so I didn't know the big funders or, the big lobbying firms. And so there was a bit of a like, I won't say it's a learning curve. I would say there was a bit of a who is this person and how do they get this position without knowing all of this.
Mhm.
And that I think translated into some aggression, some microaggressions about, whether I painted my nails blue or whether I had a nose ring and, my hair at different points or my clothes that I love the thrift store and I love 70s clothes. So they weren't like on accident,
Yeah.
So I think that there was a lot of talk like that. And I just had to just silence that and keep it moving. It was just like, well, I already have the position. So you can talk all you want and say all you want, but I already have it. So
Right. What did you write about, by the way? Because you did mention that I mean, it was
mhm.
easy for you. You're a journalist. So
Yeah.
what was the topic?
Yeah. So I wrote about how hip hop can be used as a tool of education in urban
Hmm.
communities. And that was really all I knew about. I didn't know about policy or economics or national security or anything like that. So that is really what I knew. And I was like, I'm just going to write about it. And when the person called me about the internship to interview me, they said like it was just so different. Like it was different from other things that we get, and you're also a writer, and it was for the department that wrote letters and correspondence back to people who requested the president's time. So they were just like, oh, you know how to kind of be cordial and polite and also turn people down. So yeah.
Okay. So did they ever disclose to you candidly? I see all your amazing qualities, but obviously there was trepidation when you applied because I think it was sent to you, the application for you to disseminate to others. And you said, why the hell would I give this to my competitors? I'm going to do it myself. I love that. Hey,
Yeah.
gatekeeping over here
Hmm.
for this. It worked out. Did they ever
Yes.
say, this is why we hired you?
Yeah, I think after I had the internship and then I went back, I got hired like I think 5 months later. Alyssa Mastromonaco, which was the head of the department at the time, and Danielle Crutchfield White, who was like her deputy, like right under her. I think both of them said that when they asked people in the department about who they should hire for this position, everyone said me. And I asked, and I was like, why? And they were like, because you were so mature. You had this life experience of I had worked in the business world for a while at that point. So I worked in a real estate firm as a secretary. So I had this real life experience and the jobs and everything else. And so I brought that to the White House. And I think that, they let me know that that's why I got hired. I was just like focused and I was community loving and I didn't almost like put my head down, but I
Mhm.
just used all of my experience that like other people didn't have because they were still young and they wouldn't have had that experience. Right. And, to just do the best I can at the job. And that is, I think, really why I got hired and what they told me as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you've touched upon in previous interviews navigating financial constraints. I love the
Oh,
transparency. I
yeah.
mean, even though it's public record, but you
Hmm.
started off, I think the starting salary was less than the position that you had prior to applying. So about
Yes.
40,000.
Yes.
And you left at
Hmm.
about 120, which is still, I mean,
Hmm.
not that's not a lot for all that you had to do living where you live.
Mm-mm.
That's not a lot of money. So
No.
how in the world did you end up with some savings after all of this and navigate through
Hmm.
this? Like, what was the money management and financial literacy that had to go into play?
Yeah, I mean, like to keep it 100, there was none. I think that I'm not an expensive person. Like I'm just not. It's not my style, and I'm not putting it down to buy like expensive clothes or purses and shoes. That's just not my thing. So I never spent money on that, and I worked so much that I really wasn't taking lavish vacations. So there was that. And the first couple of years that I went to the White House, I lived in a place. I lived with two roommates who were wonderful and still my friends. And I rented a room in one of their, it was like a house, and there was three of us, and it was $500 a month. And so I had a very small room, and we shared the bathroom and everything else, which was different, right? But at the same time, I lived there for like the first 3 to 4 years. And so I wasn't spending a lot of money. I won't say I was saving either. I definitely was eating. Like I love food, and I definitely love food. And then I think that towards the end of the White House, I moved out on my own, but it's still not expensive. And so I managed to be able to save some money, but it went pretty fast. So
Okay.
yeah.
Because I was like, how in the world does she navigate? I mean, obviously, your Rolodex
Yeah.
is priceless. That goes without
Mhm.
saying. The experience, I mean, people would do that for free. So, but still,
Yeah, I mean,
you have to
yeah,
eat.
yeah, you have to eat. And I think that it's also like it's DC. So there's
Right.
taxes, and then, and then there again was rent, and there was bills, and there was all these things. And I also was going to school the first 2 years I was there. So I was still paying tuition,
Mm.
at the same time. So, and I was on a payment plan, so that was great. But I think that it was very much like, I don't know if I could live in DC on that salary right now. Like I could make it
Absolutely
work,
not.
but I would have to, I don't know how I would do that now married. I don't know. So yeah.
But Deesha, now you're saying that you're not an expensive person. However,
I'm not.
you got a chance to travel at some of the finest. I feel like your
Mhm.
taste and your high-falutenness and bouginess had to have elevated after the
Oh,
experiences.
100%.
So, I
Oh,
mean, let's get
100%. But let's be real.
okay.
Like a hotel that I stayed in for the president, that could be like $1,200 a night, and then Deesha goes back by herself. It's not like they're being like, "Oh, I remember you. You could have it for 250." Like it's still like, "Oh, here's your discount of 1,000." And I don't feel comfortable. I think part of my past or whatever, I don't feel comfortable paying that much for something. Like if it's something
Okay.
that I love, like, there's a hotel in Philadelphia, the Four Seasons. I love the Four Seasons. And
Same.
if it's something like that I love, I will come out of pocket for like my birthday or something like
Mhm.
that. But otherwise, it's just like, I think growing up poor, like you also are just like, I can't fathom spending that much money on something. But there's other things I do spend money on. Like, we do go on vacations now more. But like, as far as my bouginess definitely increased like 100%.
Okay.
But it also is now within reason because I don't travel, all the time with them. So that's why I try to maximize when I do travel with them still on the vacation, like the vacation aspect in the hotels. I still try to maximize on those. So yeah.
I think that is so incredibly cool. And
Thank you.
I think generous of them as well that you guys still have this relationship. You can apply that same skill set. I mean, the humility, I just feel like the entire story is so super cool. Not only is this historic, you're still living a cool life. I know that I mean,
Yeah.
entrepreneurship is hard as hell with Hook and Fasten. I think that's cool as well. But yeah, so
Yeah. It's tough, but I manage it, and I'm thankful. I'm just thankful
uh-huh.
that I've had the opportunity to step out of imposter syndrome and see what else is possible for myself. So yeah.
So speaking of imposter syndrome, which like you, I don't even like that term, but that's what people recognize it as. I feel like it comes and goes. It goes in waves. Like at one point I'll be like, you know what? I am the SHIT. Like you are that B. Other time I definitely start questioning everything about myself. So do you think that that's more of a systemic issue because we don't see people who look like you and I in positions of power or prestige, and it's like, who am I? Or something internalized, or maybe a combination of both?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the systemic part is very prevalent, but I would say that the systemic part comes in when we look at the history of like the communities that we belong in. Like we're Black women. So the history of Black women in this country was that we were never supposed to be in power. We were pillaged, we were raped, we had to breastfeed other people's children. We're still treated different ways, just in corporate spaces or in personal spaces. And so I think that what happens is that like all the oppression that we experience, comes out in these little microaggression slash aggression, and that we internalize those as our fault. So it's like from when I was little and I was told like, I talk a lot, I have a big mouth, I question authority, like all of these things then taught me at a small age that my voice or who I was not welcomed or not right, that it was a fault. And so I grew up always thinking that, right? And that's the proper way for, that people want us to think, because then we always are in this down place of, I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy enough. I don't have any value. While other people are climbing the ladder and doing whatever, we're sitting here, lighting candles, crystals, and doing affirmations just to be like, I deserve what is rightfully mine, right? And so I think that the systemic part comes in because the oppression has been branded our fault, and it's not our fault. It is the fault of all these systems that continue to tell us what we're not and continue to keep us on. And it's subtle, it's a subtle, like, the hair, and the subtle, like how you talk, and the subtle, like, well, like your writing is not, it's the subtle ways. It's like, you don't belong in this meeting, or we're taking somebody else's ideas or promotions. And that all feeds our imposter syndrome. And so until we learn to break up with that and break free from that, and that really comes with realizing that there are consequences to doing that and being yourself. You lose the group think, you get talked about, you get told, you think you all that. Actually, I do think that. And I have the track record to prove it. And I'm sorry that you don't think that about yourself, but don't bring that on me. So I think it's a lifelong process, but I think that imposter syndrome really like branded oppression and all these things as our fault. And now we sitting here, you know what I'm saying, like trying to figure it out. And it's just like
question every little exactly.
Yeah, it's like you are not the problem. Like
right.
And it's okay to be nervous. It's okay to be scared, because that's a natural feeling. But like all this, I'm not worth like that's not you. That's some external things. And until we get comfortable, again, loving ourselves out loud, which I've just started to do, we're always going to be in that bubble. Always. So yeah.
And it's so exhausting. That's why I have to remind myself, unfortunately, to say, have the audacity of a white man. Like that's how I hear. That's because it must feel so liberating to just walk around. They don't even have to question or think. I know I'm not qualified, but I'm going to go in here confident as hell. And here we are second guessing everything from code switching to if I wear my hair like this, what are they going to think? Do I have to wear my wig today? Like
that's right.
It's so tiring.
Do I gotta straighten my hair today? Like it's all of that. And I think that over time, that tire, it's not just mental, it's also physical. Like, like we also have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. Like we also have all these things. And I don't think it's because all of us are up in this John eating like fats and whatever. And we not, you know what I'm saying? It's the mental stress of trying to conform ourselves to not be talked about, to be accepted in the group thing, to be like, I hope they say I look nice today. I hope I look whatever. Like it's a lot. It's a lot. And it's not just like adapting to your environment, because I'm saying you're not going to walk in a business meeting with like J's and overalls, but I'm saying it's just like, what if you walked in there with a bright pink suit and like pink nails? You know what I'm saying? Like that's what I'm walking there like that. Like you still professional. It may be bright, it may be fluorescent, but you still professional. So think of a way to still have your style. And I think that we've been stripped of that, just like we've been stripped of so much in this country. And so it's true. And I just try to pour back into Black women, especially, and just be like, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to waste my energy changing systems all the time. I'm trying to change people, because then your reaction to the system is not what they want. And so then you good. So I think that's what I'm trying to do.
So how do you balance still though, Deesha, like you were saying, if we are this assertive, say in a meeting or even a social scene, she's angry, you're not smiling, she's a bitch. If you're too friendly, you're flirting with somebody to try to get something. It's
Yes.
always this conflicting, trying to be in the moment, trying to combat. And it doesn't just come from like others. Like some of this too comes from within our community, which is even
Speak
more
that.
it's so exhausting. So like what do you have to constantly tell yourself to like
Yeah. I mean, I think that for me, I don't lie about it in the sense that it's hard. Like it's hard for people, for me to think that people think I'm always angry and that I'm always ready to fight. And most of the time, to be honest, I am always ready to fight. And part of that is I always tell people like, you tell me I'm defensive, but I'm defensive because you're
thank
offensive.
you.
So I don't, you want me to sit here and take it like, and and I can't do that. That's not my nature. So I think that the way that I deal with it is that I've cultivated a community that we don't have to pretend. Like we don't have to walk on eggshells. We don't have to, you can say what you want. You could do what you can wear your, sweats to brunch. Like I'm not trying to clock you. And I think that having that environment that's safe, that you could be yourself. And I've set up a bunch of those environments, one of them being my home, right? One of them being, friends' houses. So, I'm very comfortable, like me and my girlfriends at the age are just like, we like the other day we went over and we ordered Thai food and watched Later Daters, dating show. You know what I'm saying? We don't need to leave the house. It's a safe environment. We chilling. And so I think that I've got to tell myself that when the world is not safe for you, you can create safe spaces for you. And so I've done that. And then I've had to deal with the public. People think a lot about me, Brittany, all the time. And I hear it. I see it. It's obvious. And I have to be okay with that. Because if the worst you can do is talk about me at the happy hour as somebody who's angry or aggressive or whatever, then what? Okay. Like, but I also say this, I'm okay. Like, okay, what's next? So
right.
But I also want to say that number one, I have the privilege to think this way because I work for myself. So there's that. Some people don't have that privilege. But the second thing I will say is that even when people talk about me, even when they say things, they still come to me when it's time to fight. Like it's still like, Deesha, did you hear about the blah 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 blah? Can you believe this person did this? And I'm like, what you trying to do? Like, so I'm like, do you want us to say something? Like, what's the deal? And the next thing you know, I'm looking like the aggressive one. They're like, oh, I didn't mean to, like, don't come to me if you don't want me to fight about something. You know what I mean?
When
so I think that
don't all of a sudden play the victim.
Yeah, I'm always called on for the fight. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, okay. But then y'all be calling me defensive and aggressive, but you need me in the fight. You know, so it's like, so I think it's just a balancing act, but I create safe spaces for me. I realize that everybody's not going to like me. And when I was younger, I think everybody used to. And then I just grew up. I grew up and I was like, No.
See, I love that so much because one of the biggest things I struggle with and I'm trying to get better is caring too much about what other people think.
It's hard, Brittany. It's hard.
But I always wonder whether I'm in my therapy session or just trying to, journal, meditate, all the affirmations. Everything apparently stems from childhood. And I keep thinking, what was it? Because back then I was fearless. I raised my hand whenever I felt like it. I didn't care about asking questions. Now I'm thinking, are they going to think I'm stupid? I don't belong here. It's a lot of active, you belong. Not only do you belong, they should be honored that you're even in their space.
Yes. And not just honored and belonging, but you are overqualified most times because we've had to work so hard. So I always say when you go for a job, most likely you're overqualified. You're overqualified to be in that space. And it's because you've had to work so hard and you have the experience of the reaction that other people don't have because people talk about things that haven't experienced them. And that's okay. But we've experienced it, so we can talk from that standpoint. And I think that the same thing with you about childhood. Like when I first heard the inner child term, girl, I was like, what kind of jargon is that?
Right.
Like, I'm in my third, like, what? Like, I'm good. But then I realized that, like, that's why one chapter is called Digging Up the Root, and why I'm so big on digging up the root of imposter syndrome, because then I kind of went back to, I wasn't raised with my parents, and I was always told I was loud. When I went to boarding school, I was always getting in trouble and this, that, and the third. And then I was like, oh, all of that planted a root, and then that root grew into a tree, and that tree is who I am today, but the roots are still rotten. The roots are still from when I was told I was whatever. So it is like a nice therapy thing, but girl, it worked for me. So so I do follow that.
Deesha, and speaking of your book, when you were very vulnerable and open, but were there any parts, I feel like when you have to recount, whether it's childhood or I don't know, young adulthood, it kind of brings up things that you thought that you've recovered from. Were there any parts where you're like, dang, I kind of wish I did not like reopen this chapter because it did reopen some wounds?
Yes. I would say that I think anybody who writes about their life, that is going to happen, because you're writing about your past life as your present self and hopefully your future self. And so you have to forgive yourself for, just whether it's mistakes, whether it was reactions, whether it's things that you would have handled differently. So you go through a whole forgiveness process of like, I didn't know back then. Like I would have acted different, obviously, right? And so I had to give myself grace. But there was definitely some things, especially during the White House time, that I think that like I reopened, and I was just like, oh man, like I made a conscious choice to include them, because I wanted people to know that it wasn't all flowers and rainbows all the time, as people may think it was. And I wanted to be real about that, because people can relate to that real person. Like if I would have just kind of started the book like, I'm a social secretary, this is all the things we did, people would be like, oh, that's nice. Like, I can't do that. I'm not doing that. And then they would have felt worse about themselves. So I was like, let me get to the part that is hard for me, because that's probably the part that connects with people. And actually I was correct. It was chapter 6, and I did not want to write it. I didn't want it in there. That is a chapter that most people, especially Black women, be like, oh, that chapter 6. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, yeah.
So if you can go back and give yourself advice before starting the book, what would it be?
I think that I would tell myself that, like, what I do now is like, you've never done this before. Like, have some grace, right? Get off the internet sooner. Cause I had to stop while I was writing. I just like take myself off of Instagram a couple of times, and it was hard because you had to promote the book, and Facebook and all that, because I would compare myself to other established writers or other people who wrote about the same thing. And so I think that I would tell myself to give myself grace. I've never done it before. But I think I would also tell myself that I have a right and an authority to talk about this. I'm always like, I'm not Brene Brown with like a master's degree, or I'm not so-and-so. So then I would minimize my experience and my intelligence around the topic. So I think I would tell myself a little bit more of like, you are experienced and you're qualified to talk about this. And so just write, so yeah.
So I'm assuming, besides Wes and Mrs. Obama, which I'm assuming this is just my assumption, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, were helping to uplift you when you felt down during this process. Like, who else was a pillar of support?
Yeah, I'd say that there's really 2 pillars of support that I call out. One of them is I joined like a writers group. It's like a writers group for everybody who debuted in 2024, called the 2024 debuts. It's like a Slack channel. And that was really helpful for me, because I was like, oh, you're having the same issue, or this is how you promoted this, or whatever. So that was super helpful. And I would say that the other thing was there's a group of Black women DC writers, New York, kind of just East Coast. And I brought us all together for like dinner, and I kind of still lean on them for stuff and ask them questions. And so I would say that they were a big pillar too, because I think part of going through things, or imposter syndrome, whatever it is not that you expect somebody to heal you or to cure you, but just to know you're not alone. And I think that when you find out you're not alone in your feelings or your experiences or whatever, there's a comfort that comes in that says like, okay, I can push through this. And so they were very critical of being like, oh, that's not just you, girl. Like, that's the way it is. And I'd be like, really? Because I was so shocked at so much in publishing. I was like, really? And so I think those 2 groups, I think were really wonderful. So yeah.
And for your current state where you are now, can you share with us, because you still do have a lot going on. You have
Always, girl.
Hook and Fasten. So like you're in your
Oh, that's good.
entrepreneurship bag. I love the name, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. So at Hook and Fasten, it combines my community activism and kind of that background with the corporate side of me. And so we actually are hired by companies to help them do sustainable impact in the community, which means eliminating the problems versus alleviating the problem. And so we help make that connection. We involve the community. We build programs. We build volunteer programs for employees, but all with the partnership of the community and all with the cooperation of knowing that we are pushing towards like eliminating hunger versus being like, here's a sandwich, like we're going to feed people for the day. Like that's amazing and wonderful. And I love that. And people need to eat. But while we're doing that, how can we work on alleviating the need for them to have to come to a food bank or get a free meal or whatever? So we work very in that space, and it's an impact space that a lot of people don't work in because they work in very quick fixes
Right.
and PR moments, which is again not a problem, but for us it's just like, even if it takes hundreds of years and then whatever, we want to eliminate, if somebody comes in line for a sandwich, it's just like, what's going on? Do you want to maybe help us hand out the sandwiches and we can pay you, minimum wage for 4 hours? Like, how can we use whatever we have at our disposal, the companies, from products, resources, funds, and skills, to make it so the inequality doesn't exist anymore?
But before we wrap up, there's a fire round.
Yes.
Okay.
Fire round. I'm here for it.
Right. Just come with the first thing that pops into mind.
I got you.
What's the last thing that you Googled?
How to do MailChimp.
Oh, okay. That was funny. I was looking at some YouTube videos about that the other day. I need to get my email list together. Okay. All right. What's a guilty pleasure snack you can't resist?
Oh, Ben and Jerry's fish food ice cream.
I see that. I never tried. I love Ben and Jerry's, but okay, I'll have to check that one.
So
okay.
good.
Okay. If you won the lottery tomorrow, what's the first thing you'd buy?
An accountant.
You have one now, I'm sure. Well,
besides an accountant, I think the first thing I would buy is, I'd say, a piece of land.
Okay. So during your days in the White House, you prepped in sneakers. What was your favorite pair?
My favorite pair of sneakers, I would say, had to be like, I'd say they were always colorful. So I think just a colorful pair of like Nikes or Under Armour. But I also always bought the extra soles to put in there just for the cushion. So I was that old person at 30 something. So yeah.
Besides your own book, what's the one book everyone should read at least once?
Ooh, girl, fire. Okay, what comes to mind is You Are Your Best Thing by Brene Brown and Tarana Burke. And the reason why I love it is because it is a book full of essays from different people. And so it touches on so many topics, including Tarana's child. And it's just, Tarana's child writes an essay about coming out and, and being non-binary and how her mother didn't accept her. And I love the vulnerability in the book. And so I think that's what I would say.
Okay. And Deesha, you are very pro-Black woman. I loved your essay in Oprah Daily. When you said, literally, it made me teary-eyed. I have to quote, you wanted a relationship where you felt like you were worthy of love. So I got to ask, is the Black wife effect real?
No. Like, it's not for me. Number one, you will never see Wes and I hashtag interracial dating. Number one, that's a lot. That's not a lot. So we don't do all that. But no, I think that's the beauty of, if you will ever meet Wes in your life, is like, that's the beauty of us, because we are completely opposite. Like, my husband is a Grateful Dead head. He wears tie-dye shirts. He, he's just go for anything, do anything. He's a big kid. Like, he loves his job. And if I'm like don't you want to make more money at your job? He's like, no, I love my job. And I'm like, what? Like, and so no, exactly how Wes is, how he dances, how he talks with the music he listens to is exactly the same way that
I love
it
it.
started. There's a marriage effect definitely that happens when you just get married to somebody else. But no. And honestly, I'm happy about that. Like, I don't want like a John B. like, let's celebrate Black History Month, white person. Like, do you, bro? Like, study, like, do St. Patrick's Day. Like, that's good. Like, it's good. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's good.
My own, if that's what I want. If I'm trying to,
I don't need you to like light Kwanzaa candles. Like, we didn't jump a broom. Like, we didn't. And it's not that I'm not mad at people who do that. It's just that it just is not authentic to me. And I am never saying that he needs to be more Black or he never needs to whatever. Like, and we have a very great relationship where even like, if all my Black friends are like, Wes is not here, like he goes away, and not they all love him, but he knows that his presence in the space can make it whatever. And he's like, that's enough for me. Like, that's enough for me. So no, it's not real over here. And I'm happy about that.
I love it that everyone just accepts themselves for who they are in that space, and you already know what it is.
Yeah, we already know what it is. And I'm Wes's second wife. So it's just like he did all the mistakes in the first marriage.
I saw they say the divorcees are the best to get. I just said this the other day and someone took offense. This was this divorced dad. And I'm like, you already have been through some shit. And now you know how to navigate a relationship, and I won't have to take all of that.
At all. Okay. So anyway.
Thank you, Deesha, so much for sharing your journey. Can you share how people can get in contact with you and follow your journey?
Of course, yes. So I am on Instagram the most. It's Dyer267. So DeeDyer 267. And then my website is just DeeshaDyer.com, my first and last name. It has like how people can get me for speaking, download my 2-sheeter about my business. And then we are always just at info@hookandfasten.com. So anybody can get a hold of me that way or through the website, but that's where I am.
Thank you so much, Deesha. Like, legitimately.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Tell You the Truth. If you connected with today's conversation, please share, subscribe, rate, and review. It helps us grow this incredible Truth Tribe community. You can find us wherever you listen to podcasts and follow on social media for the latest updates. Until next time, keep it real and keep showing up for yourself. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.